I wish you a good welcome and a good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Still walking in, but we've got some time before everybody sits again. So I'll just start introducing myself, maybe a bit more slowly than I was intending to, but that gives everybody the time just to sit down. Like I said on the slide, our presentation for the next 30 minutes is bridging the gap between ambition and action. And when we created this slide deck some 2 weeks ago, we couldn't expect that in the morning sessions the words gap and bridging would come up so often. But apparently it's what keeps us busy, I think, and everyone for us. My name is Michel Schuurman. I've been born at 329 ppm, so the climate geeks among you can figure out how old I am. And I'm here together with Paul Hall, who will introduce himself shortly, straight after. And I'm not going to tell you what ppm he was born at, but it's just slightly lower than mine, I think. We're talking about bridging the gap, and you can see in the visual, it's also about bridging the gap between forests and then finance. And one thing I forgot when we started, sorry, is my clicker.
Yes.
Anybody
Here.
of the technique? Oh, you've got it. Thank you. It's quite good to have. That's actually the slide I was talking about, bridging the gap between ambition and action. And what we're not going to talk about for the next 30 minutes is why, because you've heard it, I think, quite well this morning in the opening keynote. We don't have any time left to get the scale when it comes to nature-based solutions. So what we are going to talk about for the next 30 minutes is the how, and you'll hear Paul talk about his extensive experience over the last 30 years developing projects and making actual impact on the ground. And then afterwards I'll get back to you and I'll talk about what we're doing now, and I'll tell you about the launch of 3.5, the Forest Carbon Accelerator, and I'll tell you all about it. Now, just to get a little sense of who's in the room, and I'm glad it's still filling up, I've been talking to some of you during the breaks, so I got a bit of a feeling, but I'd like to know just a little bit more who's in the room. Who works for a financial institution? Could you raise your hand, please? All right, a few. Who is a forest owner or forest manager or asset manager when it comes to projects? We have some here. I think about the same amount. Yeah, that includes you as well. Yeah, thank you. Consultancy, a bit more, kind of expected that one as well. And then academics, science, a few as well. There's still quite a few I haven't mentioned. Could somebody shout out what he's from, what's not been said before? NGO, thank you very much. Other people from NGOs? Thank you. And the final group that I've missed so far? Technology. I'm sorry? Technology, yeah. Thank you very much. Others, of course, in the previous sessions as well. Just to get a sense of who's in the room. Thank you very much. Paul, may I hand over to you to tell us about your experiences and the how of getting projects off the ground.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you, everybody. Pleasure to be here and to be in this audience. Nice discussions this morning, and when I was sitting here and trying to raise my hand and also speak up, it didn't work. So now I paid a little bit to have the audience, to have the floor at least. But anyway, when I try to think about what's happening this morning and what we're all busy with, I try to think about what keeps me busy, and there are in fact 3 words for me. That is trees, that is people, and that is finance. And I see that it's so interrelated now, because I came to Africa to start reforestation in I would even say, a blunt idea. And I immediately realized when I was working there, it will not work without people. So that was my first experience. The second one is that I could have great ambitions in the environmental sphere, in the social sphere, in the economic sphere, but if there is not the right balance and if there is not the investment, the necessary investment available, I will fail, because I come in a country with great expectation and I create a lot of expectations to my stakeholders, but if I don't have the money in my pocket, it will not work. So I would like to share with you a little bit the background of my company, Form International, which I founded 30 years ago. And in fact, it was at the time that FSC came up and that we saw that there was a lot of pressure on the tropical forest timber and the deforestation. But all these forest managers of logging companies, they were debating with NGOs, but they said to me, Paul, I don't know how I get my FSC certificate. I don't know how I can sustainably manage my forest. So that is the background of my company, to start working with the front-running companies in the Congo Basin, in Asia, in South America, and to bring them to next level. Later on, we start working for PEFC, and maybe hands up, who knows PEFC here? Oh, it's not too bad. PEFC, as you may know, is 3 times bigger than FSC, but not so well known, and my company is one of the 5 assessors of their national standards. From certification, we moved on to asset management. Into asset management, that's around 2000 then. Timber was the key driver of the business case. And then later on, carbon came in, and we could add carbon certification, we could add VCS, Plan Vivo, etc. And today I can say that we are becoming a more full-service restoration actor, company, investor, developer. I cannot say it in one word. What have we done so far in the 30 years? We have run about 250 projects, partly consultancy, partly investments. In our own projects, we have sequestered about 750,000 tons of carbon. We manage about 30,000 hectares, and we have contributed to sustainable forest management of 6.8 million hectares in the tropics. I started in 2007 an investment vehicle, and we were able to invest about 70 million. 74 is the total investment we have today. What inspires me, and I go back to Ghana now, because Ghana is for me a good role model. It's just one of the projects. We do several projects in Peru, South America. We do several projects in Africa and also in Indonesia. But Ghana is for me the learning curve. And when I came in 2000 to Ghana and I asked the Forestry Commission, well, can I assist with large-scale reforestation? Where can I start? And they said, well, we have a forest reserve, and please go there and you will see it. And I looked at it and I said, well, okay, is this a forest reserve? Yes, they explained me. It's a logging concession, it's overlogged. The intention was to have a cycle, to log out 1 tree per hectare and then come back after 30 years. But unfortunately, there was illegal logging, there was shifting cultivation, burning, and it's completely degraded. And that triggered me, because if you then look at the figures of Ghana, in 1980 there was still 8 million hectares of natural forests. After 2000, so after 25 years, the 8 million was reduced to 1 million. So that is amazing. And for me, Ghana is not to blame Ghana. No, I love Ghana. But it's just to say it's a kind of representation what is happening in a lot of tropical forest countries. That degradation is representative for South America, for Africa, and for Asia. So I started thinking, and I said, well, if we can start here a good model to start regeneration, reforestation, that would be great. And after 5-6 years, you see a picture like this. And this area is still very prominent for me, because you can stand on a hilltop and you can see what you are doing. So it's amazing. And I want to go back, because these type of situations I face in a lot of countries now where we start working. And it's always to visualize how can we regreen this. Another important moment for me was the COP in Paris, where we were invited by World Resources Institute to do a commitment on AFR 100, which is the commitment to restore 100 million hectares in Africa. And as a spin-off of Paris, I organized the conference New Forests for Africa, together with Kofi Annan, and it was for me very inspiring what he advised to me and how he guided me, especially towards the point that if you want to have an impact, please look at the enabling environment, because if you don't have the enabling environment, your investment, your whole impact will not be successful. A bit more about Ghana, and also referring to what was said this morning, we were talking about the fact that, well, we can do this type of reforestation or forest conservation, but it is quite difficult to do it in the right way. So what we learned, that if you have a right balance between social, environmental and economic factors, you can do a good job. And I don't say that we do all in the right way, but that is what we try to balance. And the first thing is, of course, that you create jobs. The second one, what we started doing in Ghana, is to have a good intercropping system. Because in all these degraded areas, you can have a clean land title, and you will find illegal farmers. So some companies, they say, well, we just kick out the farmers, or we ask the police to kick them out. We said, no, they are fine. They can grow with us. They can grow their crops with us. They can plant in between the trees, and gradually we move on with them. Another important part, what we learned, is the revenue share model. And Marie-Noël referred to that. Is Marie-Noël still there in the room? No, I don't think so. But the interaction with your stakeholders, so in the land lease concept, to have a good revenue share model where the central government, you have to pay your tax and your lease fee, but the communities must have directly payments on an annual basis to see that they have also income from these kind of projects. So we developed, together with the Forestry Commission of Ghana, a revenue share model. And that revenue share model is now adopted in the parliament and is legislation. So through this, the local ownership is fundamental in such a project. On the environmental basis, we were talking this morning about the biodiversity. I tried to ask something, but I will bring it in now. The point on biodiversity for me is, yes, of course, we must do that. And we plant 10% indigenous species. We have a mosaic of natural forest and the teak plantation. But how can you bring in a 100% biodiversity project to a bank, to an investor? You always have to balance this with the return on investment. So I would say, yes, biodiversity as much as you can, but you still have to keep up the sound returns. Otherwise, you don't get the long-term investment. Another point, and again, as I said, that's fundamental, is how you deal with the finances. And what I learned in Ghana is that if you don't plan in a DCF model where you plan in 20, 30 years ahead, cost revenue based, hectare based, you will not be successful, because or you plant too much and you don't have money for maintenance, or you cannot keep up your promises in terms of the social aspects and the ecological aspects. So it's always a question of seeking the right balance between ecology social, and economy. And I think that is what we have to prove as a sector. We must show that a sound return, let's say 10%, maybe less, maybe more, that must be visible. And referring also to this morning, maybe we can also think about the risk profile of countries, because if a bank is counting with a risk factor or a discount rate or a WACC or whatever you call it of 14%, you will see immediately that it has a great impact on what you can do with a project. So this is in a nutshell what we are doing. To summarize, if you are talking about large-scale reforestation or conservation, my view is that the viable business plan is key. And yes, we must talk about the benefits for local people, we must talk about biodiversity, but if you cannot integrate the final the social expectations and the ecological or biodiversity expectation into that same financial model, you will sooner or later you will fail. So having said that, with this experience, which is just Ghana, but is really a role model for us now for many tropical areas, we have thought about how can we accelerate a bit more the early stage projects, because I think all of you have contact with projects which are quite good, quite promising, but on a management level or on the bankable business case, they are too poor or too low. So Michel will tell you a bit more about our new company, Tree5, who is really an accelerator in terms of co-funding the development stage and technically support the development stage. So thank you for now, and Michel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, so I think it's valuable to acknowledge the fact that the Forum team in general, and Paul just mentioned it, has about 30 years of experience in multiple tropical countries setting up projects. And the next step, of course, and then we get to the now, is, all right, we need to scale. And I'm not going to explain why again, because that's been said before. And Paul teamed up with Liesbeth Gort, the then CEO of FSC in the Netherlands, and said we need to devise a forest carbon accelerator. And I'm very thrilled that today we're actually launching that. It's been gradually building up over the last year. I would have wished Liesbeth was here, but she's in Switzerland, another relevant business as well. So I'm just representing her on stage. And I'll just quickly run through what Tree5 is all about. So actually what it comprises of, but also what we're already doing and what we're planning to do. Now the first, let's say, branch on the tree is the fact that we have a team of dedicated and experienced staff. I said before, our CEO, Liesbeth, is coming from the Forest Stewardship Committee, and she's very much engaged for many years in tropical forests. Paul obviously has a role to play, myself, and I'll talk about myself later on. But more importantly, the technical capacity and the technical expertise that has been built up within Forum over the last decades. So we have technical staff when it comes to forest management, when it comes to carbon asset management, financial business modeling, etc. So we bring a lot of experience together in this new entity. And we do that, of course, basically to get the forest asset and landowners to a stage in which the project becomes bankable. So the second branch, of course, is the boots on the ground, if you will, the people who are working in tropical regions to set up these projects. And the third one is the financial institutions. That was why I'm a bit wondering and curious earlier this afternoon who was in the room. I think the financial institutions are not only giving us the opportunity to develop those projects, but also have a role to play in the next phase of that project development, and I'll come back to that later on. And the fourth and final branch, of course, are the off-takers, are the businesses, the companies that are either getting the products, could be timber, could be non-forest timber products, but also carbon credits, of course. And we work solely, at least up to now, with corporations who are engaged with science-based targets, for instance, mitigating already and lowering their CO2 emissions, but still need to do offsets for their, for now, unavoidable CO2 emissions. So that kind of businesses that we're working with. And if you combine these market forces, then you get a really strong mix, and you could say a platform, if you will, that enables tropical forest landscapes, but most of all the people and the animals that live in them, to have a long-term perspective, including a viable business case, as Paul mentioned. Now, just briefly to touch upon the focus that we have, because Tree5 is a very focused instrument, and it focuses on tropical forest regions around the world. It focuses on ARR projects, REDD+, and improved forest management. So it's really, let's say, laser focused on what it's doing. And I think that's very interesting. It's developing new projects greenfield, literally from scratch, and validating and bringing to the market existing projects. So it's this interesting mix, also from a risk perspective, which has been a word that has been outed before, to get both greenfield and brownfield projects to scale. Just to dive a little bit deeper, to transform these project ideas, so I'm now talking about those new projects, into high-quality investable projects. And high quality, obviously, is this, let's say, abstract meaning of, or meaningless, if you will, concept. So what do we mean by it? We have a very high integrity standard in which we really look about land rights. We really dive deep into the additionality, the permanence, etc. And not only high over, but, and I'll show you an example later on, also again on the ground where the expertise of Form has taken shape. We do the technical assistance for his early phase projects and the project design. And well, the next session will solely focus on design, so I'll just leave that for now. But especially the technical assistance, I'd like to draw your attention to a report that was released by Climate Focus a couple of weeks ago, that one of the biggest barriers that is currently perceived by project owners to get their projects financed is the lack of technical capacity. So when we talk about bridging the gap, I think it's multiple gaps, but this is one of the gaps that we're actually trying to bridge. I'll develop a robust business case, and I'll just not stop at that because Paul already mentioned that one. I would like to say, though, that the robust business case is mostly based on multiple revenue streams. So it's not just the carbon, or maybe in the future the biodiversity part, but it's also sometimes agroforestry. It could be a timber element. It's the mixture of those that make it a robust business case. We incubate the project, so this is actually where the real work happens, where real stuff on the ground. And I just said to Stuart, I really admired his project that he mentioned earlier. I think we're on the same stage, even in the same country, as I'll explain later on, with the same focus on quality. Once the project's live and up and running, we do the validation, we do the certification to meet ESG criteria, of course, but also broader market criteria. So here again, we are obviously looking at biodiversity and the developments that's been taking place in that field. And then at the end, we do facilitate the sale of carbon and possibly even the project itself. And I deliberately say facilitate because we're not a trader, we're not a broker. We facilitate the relationship between the project and the company, and we take, in that case, a market facilitation role. Now, what do we do ourselves? We do the early investment, and it's pretty unique, I think. We take the risk of setting up that early stage, what Paul already mentioned and was mentioned this morning as well, as one of those gaps that need to be filled. And we have the relationship with some investors already, and we're engaged in a couple of more who are looking at the next phase of investment in developing a project and making them become mature. Then the credit delivery, of course, takes place depending on whether it's an existing project like REDD+, or it's an ARR project, which takes some longer time, and it will develop revenues. Obviously, when you talk about high quality and you talk about integrity, you immediately start to talk about long-term relationships. So we're really engaging with corporations that are not into spot trading, but are really looking forward in forward contracting and engaging for the long run, for the benefit of the company itself, of course, but also for the community and the other elements. And 3.5 itself, and I think that's pretty interesting to share with you as well. We set it up as a social enterprise. What we mean by that, because that's also a bit of a vague concept, but what we mean by that is the fact that once the sale of the credit or the project is generated, we generate revenues for ourselves, and that is again like a revolving structure flowing back into financing the next project. So that's the way we've set it up. And well, I'll show you our targets later on, but we hope to grow and expand that. Now, to give you two examples, I mean, like I said, it's from ambition to action. What are we currently doing? This is a project in Congo we're engaged with. It's a REDD+ project. It's in the phase of certification at the moment. It's quite an extensive area. And when you talk about additionality, this is a project that it's a national park, and it's being invaded from the east mostly by illegal mining and illegal logging. And the money is needed to get more rangers trained and to get more security on the ground to make sure that the forest is protected. So if you talk about, right, why am I investing in it? Yes, it's a high diversity, high biodiversity hotspot, but it's also getting people on the ground to make sure that this is protected. A second one, and that's more greenfield. And again, we come back to Peru, a little bit north of the area that Stuart mentioned. It's close to the Amazonian rainforest. It used to be rainforest, but it turned into grazing lands a couple of years ago, and now it's a degraded land. And what we're aiming for is a mixture of conservation and business, in this case, a timber business, so a nucleus plantation, where not only the wood's grown, but also a factory locally, so you create these jobs and you create this added value in the region, mixed with biodiversity corridors, with mixed native species. So we've got these elements, I think, in place, what's been discussed about in earlier sessions. And the interesting thing, at least one of the interesting things, is the fact that, yes, it's an owned plantation. We're currently in the process of purchasing the land, but it's also, like learned in Ghana, with local community outgrowers and smallholders in the surroundings that will benefit as well. And the business case will be a mixture of timber and carbon credits in the future. And, well, we have still an investment need here. To slowly finish off, this is Oliver. We're talking a lot about concepts and future, etc. This is a colleague, boots on the ground, working in Ghana in this case, of protecting a rainforest and doing sustainable forest management. And I've been relatively new to Forum in 3.5, but I've been very humbled by the fact that there are so many people that are dedicating their careers and their lives to protecting a hectare or 1,000 hectares or 100,000 hectares and doing that in a very professional way. Another thing is my colleague Rosa, who has been working on a fire management and fire protection plan in Africa. And she set up a forest fire management scheme and implemented that, including trainings here in Africa. And that has reduced the damage of forest fires by 78%. 78%. So when you talk about permanence, which at least to me personally, it always sounds a bit abstract. This is permanence on the ground. This is teaching people how to deal with forest fires and diminishing the damage. I just said I recently joined 3.5. It's a new startup, of course. So, and my background is in corporate sustainability. I've been helping businesses and corporations for the last, well, let's say 15 years in lowering their CO2 emissions and trying to get new business model in, circular economy, etc. And I failed. And I think we failed. I said before, I was born at 329 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. When I started working in the corporate sustainability area, it was around 380. And I checked this morning, we're at 416. So I'm not saying businesses shouldn't work harder on lowering their CO2 emissions, but I am saying that in addition to that, we need natural climate solutions at scale if we want to limit global warming at 1.5, if it's even possible, or 2 degrees at the most. So that's why I joined 3.5. And that's why I hope that you will join 3.5 as well, because with all the people in the audience, investors, project owners, companies that are looking for offsetting their emissions, we can really make a dent in the universe. And I truly believe that with the right partners, we can take the next step forward. I'm very glad we have the first partners on board that are supporting us. So again, we're launching because we are actually on the move. This is not a concept. We have the first projects on the ground. We have the first financial partners in. And we have the support of some others. And this is our target. So if you want to engage with us, this is where we're going. By 2030, we want to have invested 150 million to protect 2 million hectares and sequester about 35 million tons of CO2. And we want to partner. We are partnering, but we want to partner with project owners. We want to partner with investors, and we want to partner with businesses. So please do get in touch with either Paul or myself during the drinks. A colleague Esther is also in the room. And that concludes my part of the presentation. Paul, if I may ask, we try to tell a lot to the audience about your experience, about our plans. If there are two things that you would like the audience to take out of what we've discussed, what would that be?
Well, you've told them a lot already, so not much to add. But just maybe to conclude again, I see this accelerator really as a partner and a co-creator, because if you see how many initiatives there are here, it's really a question of co-creation, and we all have our expertise. A lot of you have your foot and your boots on the ground. So it's a question how we can very smartly work together and accelerate new projects through co-investment, through technical support, because I think the big challenge is here to bring potentially good projects to the next level and let them not fail, let them not be just the potential good projects which will never get additional funding or never get the high sustainability level we all want. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.